Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Holistic Navigator podcast. I'm the producer of the show, Brian Strickland, and here with me in the studio is Ed Jones. Ed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well. I want to kind of turn the hands of the clock back. There was a time a few years ago, before I got divorced, that we were watching at Christmas some of the old, what was the kind of film that used to be on the reels? Not 8-track. It was the... There was
reel-to-reel?
Reel-to-reel, but there was, I think, another actual name for it. But it was the really old stuff from 1960, 61. It was actually my ex-wife's family. And it was a film of the church football team. And it wasn't a super organized team, but it was something that they played every weekend. And I was watching it, and it didn't take me but a couple minutes to start realizing there was not one single kid, and there was probably the ages of 15 to 18 that, you know, I was looking at. They were all fit looking, that none of them had looked like an ounce of extra weight. And at first I started assuming, well, it's because, you know, they were, of course, just young and they were athletic. These weren't even athletes. These were just weekend warriors. And then I looked in the stands where the parents, there wasn't one single person who was overweight. Turn the clock forward till 2017. It's not even like in the same world. In fact, statistics say that 3/4 of men in this country is obese, and 60% of women. And I'm sure we would all agree to that. And what are the reasons for this obesity? Well, there is a multiple list of reasons, some of which you're not hearing commonly, especially if you go to your healthcare practitioner. I don't want to be super negative on healthcare practitioners because they can save our life, and that's what they're fantastic at. What they're not great at is giving advice on how to optimize the physical chemistry of our body in order to have the kind of physique we want, the energy we want, the libido we want, the lack of depression that we want. They're kind of poorly skilled with that, and it's not always their fault, because I think the public should take some blame for this. And the reason I say that is because, you know, wherever you go get your hair cut, like I'll go to a nice lady and, you know, she's been cutting my hair for years. Well, you know what? She knows a whole lot about hair cutting. But if I go to her and I say, you know, why is it that I'm losing my hair in a certain spot, or, you know, I've got this funny looking thing on my scalp, even though she does hair 5 days a week, that's not where her scope of knowledge is. Well, for some reason, we think anyone with a white coat and a stethoscope should know pretty much all about the human body and physiology and should be able to answer the questions. They don't. They simply don't when it comes to nutrition, functional medicine, holistic, and trying to optimize the chemistry of the human system.
So, Ed, if I'm headed to the doctor and I'm wanting to lose weight, what are some of the common things that I might hear from a physician?
I think that's a great question, because generally they're still adhering to the old school philosophy of calories in and calories out. And that is what we all heard when the older of us were growing up, is push the plate away. Just simply eat less. Well, you know what? There's a time in our life where if you gained a few pounds, you could do something like that and it would work because you were young. But the reason it worked was not primarily because you ate less. Here is the take-home message. It worked because your chemistry was far more optimal and balanced than it is today. It really wasn't about the calories. It was about how efficient you are at burning calories. And that's why I hear every single day on multiple times, the person, and it tends to be a little more women than men, is I have eaten so good. I've gone to the gym 6 days a week. I'm addressing every component I can think of, and I have not lost a pound, and I've been doing this for 8 weeks. That is so common. So what do some people do? Well, some especially if they ask their health provider, it's just about, exercise more and eat less, exercise more and eat less. And I have watched this for 40 years, how incorrect this is. And so what do? If we're getting bad advice, then where do we go? If that's not going to work, then what does work? The reason the vast majority, when I say vast, I would estimate about 80% of the people who cannot lose weight past 30 years old, it's because it's not so much because they're eating excess calories, which they might. It is because their blood chemistry has been altered in very unhealthy ways. And it's been altered by the lifestyle that we lead, the environment that we have to be exposed to, the fact that we live under chronic stress, and multiple layers of all this together creates a implosion of efficiency so that when you eat anything, it turns to body fat instead of energy. That's where the rubber meets the road, because if we can recreate the chemistry in our own physical body, we can turn the hands of the clock back, people. We don't have to live in a spiraling series of diets and lose 2 pounds and gain 3 and feel unhealthy and feel sluggish. And it's not just the mirror that we're looking at that makes us feel negative. When your blood chemistry is not in the optimal range, everything will eventually be going the wrong direction. All the things that we used to see in people who are 70 plus is now hitting people who are 40, 3 decades earlier. And it's really sad. So here is what I would recommend for all people who are struggling with this weight issue. First off, we want to look at some blood work. I have been an astute student of blood work for 15 years, and it's totally different than when you go to the doc and you get blood work as a physical. They are looking for disease. That is the only purpose of that blood work. When I look at blood work or I study it, it is about what we call functional medicine or integrative type of perception, so that we can see where you are and what would be optimal. Because keep in mind, optimal blood levels is what we must attempt to achieve, not average. Average blood levels will take you close to the grave, and then all of a sudden, they're bad. When you attempt to be at optimal levels, I doubt most people at 45 years old are optimal, because I see enough blood work to know that. But they can become optimal if you do the right things. So what are the big tests that we want to really focus on if you get blood work? The number one test is C-reactive protein. That is a test that is a marker for inflammation. When your body is inflamed, it is going to create far less health and far more increased disease. But on the other side, it is a factor that will play into how your body can be efficient in all regards, including weight. You want C-reactive protein under 2. Do not believe the reference ranges. You want them under 2. What causes it to be high? Stress, not sleeping, lack of omega-3s, too many carbohydrates. Believe it or not, too much exercise can cause C-reactive protein to be high. Certainly some diseases can do that, but C-reactive is a very important one. Second one, huge importance, is insulin. It's fasting insulin. And fasting insulin, I think on a blood work, has a wide range. It actually, I think, goes up to somewhere like 12 to 15. Let me tell you something. Anything over 3 to 4, and you're going to start having trouble losing weight in most cases. Now, insulin's number one job is not to balance blood sugar. It is to store food for later. So if you have a certain molecule in your body whose job is to store food for later, guess what it does when it's elevated? It looks at a cracker and it puts on a weight. We are programmed to live through famines. We actually are very well designed for hardship. Throughout history, we've lived through, we haven't always had grocery stores, believe it or not. And so when we go through these famines, the job of insulin was, if you found some food, it wanted to hold on to it as long as possible because the body chemistry was trying to preserve you so that you could remain alive. Well, for some reason, due to all the multiple factors of stress, sleep, blank, 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 the body is escalating its insulin for those reasons. So you are giving your body something that's a magnet for food. So what we want 2 and under on insulin.
So besides just normal diet and nutrition, are there actual supplements that we can take to help control those insulin levels?
Well, first off, the knife and fork and sleep are the 2 strongest medicines for the insulin levels. Missing meals in an untimely basis just because you're busy and stressed is terrible for insulin. Not sleeping because it raises cortisol. Living under horrible types of chronic stress will raise cortisol, which then raises insulin. But as far as supplements, absolutely. I am a person who has watched people go from 10 and 12 insulins down to 2 by managing their life, their knife and fork, and their supplement program. So the ones that I truly love to watch work is, first off, omega-3. Omega-3 is the king of how insulin is processed, triglycerides. And when you look at blood work of people who test for omega-3, which I can almost guarantee you, unless you go to a very holistically minded physician, you've never been tested. And here's what really winds my clock up about this is omega-3 levels in blood work is now regarded as the number 1 most accurate predictor of mortality that there is. It's not cholesterol. It's not all the other things that you get checked at a physical. It is your omega-3 levels. Well, guess what? If there was a test that predicted your mortality, don't you think or wouldn't you believe that the mainstream people would embrace this? No, there's a bias against bringing this kind of conversation into a medical office. If it's low, then they're going to have to recommend you to go to a health food store or at least a drugstore that sells, of course, the nutrients. And that simply isn't in their comfort zone. So that's where the broken system is causing people grief. So, yes, the knife and fork, eating regularly, not eating too many carbs, taking omega-3. If it's extremely high, you actually kind of call yourself a pre-diabetic, even though insulin's not the way to diagnose that. And so you would want to consider herbs like berberine. That's phenomenal for balancing blood sugar. In fact, berberine is very similar to metformin. So if you go into your doctor and you did have high insulin and uncontrolled glucose of some sort, the metformin is going to be your first drug. And it's actually not the worst drug on earth. I think there's actually only 5 great drugs that I completely always recommend. Metformin is number 5 on those if the herbs don't work. But most of the time, berberine, if you have a quality brand and you take the right dose, will help you significantly on a lot of these issues. We've covered C-reactive protein and fasting insulin. The other thing is if you get a CBC and complete panel that's very low in cost, it's going to kind of rule out and rule in whether you have some significant other issues like your blood work. You can look on that. It's not specific for this weight loss, but if you're going to go ahead and order blood work, get a complete metabolic panel called a CMP and a CBC. Those 2 will give you a huge amount of information that is fairly easy to decipher. Now, the last thing to look at, and this is where it's very definitive if we want to rule in or rule out whether you have what we call insulin resistance. This is, believe it or not, looking at insulin is not my number 1 method of seeing if you're insulin resistant. It's actually looking at a lipid panel. And a lipid panel, of course, consists of cholesterol, HDL, LDL, and triglycerides. And here's the rule of thumb. We know that the marker for these blood tests means this. If your triglycerides are a 4-to-1 ratio with HDL being the supposed good guys, but the lipid panel, if you have a triglyceride of 200 and you have an HDL of 50, you're full-blown insulin resistant. What does that mean? Insulin resistance means that the insulin's not being able to work, so it keeps elevating it higher and higher because it has a need to shuttle glucose into a cell for energy. So when you look at a glucose and a triglyceride and HDL levels and it's 4-to-1, we have to fix that, or you're going to have too much inflammation, which will destroy your health eventually. But you're also going to have the weight thing going on consistently. So again, you start treating yourself somewhat as a pre-diabetic, but you also embrace the nutrient that we would use and not the drugs. And you also don't, in my opinion, follow the old school philosophy of the USDA and all of the terrible information that they have created, in fact, even through schools and through all the things they teach, because we know that the U.S. government subsidizes the very crops identified as being the most harmful to human health and the environment. And those top three are corn, wheat, and soybeans. And so when the government is subsidizing these three foods that in anything beyond small amounts is devastating to the health of the human body and or that of our pets, then how can you trust the information? And the food pyramid is ridiculous. It is absolutely going to create insulin resistance if you follow it. For those who want to get blood work, we are living in a wonderful age and time of certain freedoms that were never available back even before 2000, really before 2010. And that is the ability to order blood work through the internet. And I'm so shocked that more people don't know about this. Is you will go online and you will pick the test that you want. And you will sign up, you will pay for the test, and in about 2 hours you will get a requisition from a physician who has signed off on this blood work. And then you'll print that, and in every big city there is a drawing station. LabCorp or Quest are the two main ones. And you will take that paperwork in and just give your blood. And 2 to 4 days later, you'll get an email saying your results are back. Very efficient system. One reason you're not knowing about it is because no one wants to tell you. Because the cost of, say, testosterone is about $10 to do a testosterone test through these kind of things in some labs, not all. I've seen it charged at a medical office for $100 to $200 for the same exact test. So that's one reason is they want the money part is continuing this parade of not being honest about the options. But, knowing that you can do this at a discounted rate is life-saving. Life-saving. But if you're going to get blood work, here's what you do. Always get vitamin D checked at least once. You got to have it over 50 nanograms if you want to decrease disease significantly. So pay the money. It's usually $30 or $40. You want a CBC, a CMP, C-reactive protein, fasting insulin, and ferritin, storage iron. Just in case you're writing this down, you want ferritin to be no more than 60. That is, actually, storage iron rusts you like it does an old car in the junkyard. So we don't want too much iron. If you do, you want to go give blood at a blood assurance place. And then I think for men and women, if you are interested, checking the hormones would be a panel that you would check on the hormones. And that would give you a good array of tests. Now, there is a gene that I will do an entire show on called MTHFR. And I would highly recommend anyone who has any real concerns for longevity and health to at least do one test, because once you do a gene, it's never going to change. MTHFR, I'm not sure if that's extremely costly. Last time I looked, it was about $100. But when you look in the implications of MTHFR, you'll understand the value of that.
So, Ed, I know we're talking a lot about weight loss and what it means to be at a healthy weight. And I think a lot of people may have the misconception that a healthy weight may mean that you look thin and muscular on the outside. Can you talk about why that's maybe not always the case, and how your blood chemistry and your internal health is just as important as how you look on the outside?
Absolutely, because we all know of people who have looked excellent who dropped dead, first off. So, there are certain people who have just great genetics for a physique and for making the external look very well. And that doesn't really, it has modest connection to health, but not a significant direction. Connection. So we need again to evaluate it from the parameters that we're speaking about. And one other thing about healthy weight is many people, when we're all born, we have these certain tendencies, genetics that are really programmed in. They are the blueprint, as though you were building a building, and that's going to be the way it kind of is, even no matter how many years go by. There are people who are programmed, like I'm programmed to weigh 173 pounds. In my early days, I wanted to be a big bodybuilder, so I ate a ton of food so I could become 200 plus pounds. And then when I ran marathons, I was weighing 150. But nature wanted me to be at 173. As we age, we have to find the connection and wisdom intuitively somewhat to what did nature really want for us. Sometimes you can do that by going back and thinking, what did I weigh at 16 years old? Not that we need that to be the ideal, but it's somewhere in the ballpark of where you weighed between 16 and 20 is probably what your genetics kind of wanted you to be, plus about 15% at most. And so looking at your actual weight, I know women who I want to weigh 115, but we know for a fact that nature wants them to weigh 135. Well, you're going to have to, if you do and you fall into that, you're going to have to use, well, I don't recommend that, because when you alter nature significantly, you're going to pay a price. I don't care what it is, whether you're underweight and you gain or you're overweight and you lose. We want to be within the realm of what you are programmed and blueprinted to be. So mentally, sometimes we have to get past this. And, the thing about weight, and we always have to bring in the concept of, exercise. But the thing about exercise is it goes back a little bit to the calorie in, calorie out type of argument that we've lived with since beginning of time. And yes, you burn calories. I burned, 300 calories this morning at the gym. I could see it on the numbers. What most people do with that is it just allows them to eat more food. It doesn't, in most cases, is really not, the math is not adding up. What exercise does is it lowers cortisol. That's why it works, because anytime your stress hormone, cortisol, is elevated, it's going to drag insulin up. And I've fully tried to educate you about the implications of this insulin molecule. So anything that can lower insulin is going to probably lower your tendency to gain weight. So if we could lower insulin through other methods, I truly believe you don't have to exercise to maintain proper weight. But we know the other benefits of that, which is you look better, you're more toned, your heart will be healthier because of it. Your heart wants to be exercised. But the bigger next comment I want to make is sleep. And why, when you don't sleep, the body will accumulate toxins. It will keep cortisol high. The adrenal glands get exhausted, and then they start screwing up with all of their production of hormones and not hormones. And you go down this whole slippery slope of this causes 12 other things to happen, and then all of a sudden you're just out of control. Then very few things work, because we got to get yourself back balanced. And again, we come back to the blood chemistry. The type of diet that we should be doing is still at least a slight keto philosophy. Does not have to be in ketosis, but the diet that you need is one has the modest to high protein. When I say high, maybe 1/2 gram of protein per pound of body weight, up to 3/4 gram. That means if I weigh 100, or let's say you weigh 200 pounds, that means, a half a gram of that would be 100 grams a day. So 100 to 110, maybe 120. That's easy to get. Many of us in this country eat way too much protein. It's easy to get 40 grams in one meal if you go have, a hamburger, you have even fish and chicken and a few other things. So, working on that part is extremely important. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think it's important. You were mentioning sleep. I think everyone thinks, well, I get close to 8 hours a day. That should be plenty, right? But it's important to understand that that's really the minimum recommendation.
Well, there are individuals who can get by on 6. I think the quality of the sleep is number one, and then secondly is the amount of time. I think when people say they got 8 hours, that means that's when their head hit the pillow, and then it doesn't count the time they got up to go to the bathroom if they did, and this and whatever. I have now, and believe it or not, only that recently have I finally knocked myself in the head to understand this. If I counted when my head hit the pillow, I don't count that any longer. My head hits the pillow, I go forward 30 minutes. And that way, if I go to bed at 9 o'clock, I'm saying to myself, I didn't go to bed till 9:30, because that is how long it takes to really start getting into that kind of sleep mode. And then, you have to deduct away the time if you do wake up, which as we get older, it is so common, and it's not anything unhealthy. I think it just comes with the aging process that we tend to wake up. One is the bladder, the prostate. The other is the kind of like brain chemistry just forces it to happen. And again, I talked about on the sleep episode, GABA is my absolute angel of all time. Supplementally, I take it during the night if I wake up. 1,000 milligrams has been is actually, I believe, saved my life because it helps me to get back into that deep sleep. Then what does that do? Well, it's lowering cortisol again, which is keeping the insulin low. So when you combine some exercise that lowers cortisol, good sleep that lowers cortisol, not living a crazy life and having some downtime where you're connecting with something bigger than yourself, something that has contentment and joy and peace in it, whether that be climbing rocks or being with your child, going to church, it doesn't matter, but it has to be on a regular basis. And then you look at blood chemistry, then you start doing the knife and fork correctly and adding your core 4 supplements, which we always talk about. I think if you have to only do 4 things, and that's the only things you ever do the rest of your life, you have to be on a quality multivitamin. Centrum is not it. You have to be on the right omega-3. Choose wisely because they're full of heavy metals if you don't buy them from the right vendor. Probiotics, most of them are worthless because they won't implant, so you have to also know the territory of where that lies. And then lastly, superfoods. Superfoods being the green drinks that contain all the phytochemicals that detox your liver, make us less acidic, boom, boom, boom. So the core 4 is the longevity. It is the retirement account for your physical health. Don't start trying to put this retirement account together when you're struggling and you're 50 years old. Do it with common sense early on and build this retirement account, people.
I feel like a lot of people often think that there's just one way to lose weight, right? There's one healthy diet to adhere to. I know you're a big fan of the keto diet and have been for a long time, and it's more of a lifestyle for you now and has been for quite some time. But could you speak about there's not a one-size-fits-all diet for everyone? It may work for somebody, and it may not work for others.
No, there's not a one size. We obviously know that. We have people who are a perfect weight who've never even known what the word keto is and wouldn't do it if they did. When I say keto, I'm never in ketosis. I just lean toward those principles. And those principles involve eating a lot of colored quality foods every day, at least twice, and doing the right choosing of foods. However, I'm also a huge fan of intermittent fasting, where you don't eat 13 to 14 hours a day. I think that no matter what diet you are on can help stimulate, because it again helps to balance insulin and cortisol and blank, blank, blank. You can eat, some people can eat other types of diet and do well. The issue with me is it still has to have healthy fat. If nothing else comes from this conversation and you believe any thread of what I say or have any faith in what I believe, it's the one thing is you need to have added fat, healthy fat, with every single meal, breakfast, lunch, supper, and snack. Now, can you do too much fat? Well, heck yes, because they're calorie dense. The old thing I keep talking about calories in, calories out, there still is some significance to this. If I started eating all the exact foods I'm eating now, but I doubled it, well, I can still say I'm on the right macros and the right proportions, but my calorie content would be on an insane level. So, of course, I would gain weight. So we have to use some common sense on this now. But the thing that fat does is it slows the in the rate of which the carbohydrates, even healthy ones, are going to go into the system. And that is key, absolutely key to making the chemistry optimal. So what do? The breakfast drink, of course, has MCT in it. At lunch, I take ghee. I went today to an Indian place. We had Indian food with my daughter. I take a little packet of ghee, which is clarified butter. I completely douse my food with ghee, and I take a small bottle of olive oil from high-quality sources. Most of them are junk and counterfeit, so be careful who you buy them from. And I completely saturate my salad with the olive oil, so I'm getting huge amounts of fat. I will eat a bar at 2:30 that will have fat in it. I love the Bulletproof bar. And then at supper, I'll do the same as lunch. And then I don't eat at night anymore because I'm intermittent fasting, so I will be done at supper at 5:30, and then I will not eat again for 13 hours, and so there I go. Well, guess what? That's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and just so you know, you can now find us on iTunes. If you wouldn't mind leaving us a review and subscribing, that really helps us get the word out about this podcast. If you have any questions, be sure to visit theholisticnavigator.com and drop us a note. We really love hearing from our listeners. And until next time, I'm Ed Jones. And remember, whenever a doctor cannot do good, he must be kept from doing harm. Thank you so much.